Middle East faces an escalating crisis as recent military action heightens tensions. Israel's strikes on Iran, Lebanon and Syria have sparked global condemnation, with Iran positioning for potential retaliation. International leaders, including those from the UN and the G7, are urgently calling for restraint to avoid a full-scale regional conflict. And with the US election ramping up, we will explore how the developments in the Middle East are influencing voters. Welcome to In Depth. Let us analyze the rapidly intensifying ongoing tensions and Israeli violations on Gaza, Lebanon and Iran, highlighting the latest military escalations, diplomatic reactions and the humanitarian impact in this evolving Middle East crisis. We start with the New York Times that has reported that Israel's recent airstrikes on Iranian military installations marks a significant escalation between the two nations, although it intentionally spared nuclear facilities to avoid a full-scale conflict. This carefully calibrated approach, openly acknowledged by Israeli officials, aims to degrade Iran's military assets while minimizing escalation risks. In response, Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian condemned the attack, affirming Iran's commitment to defending its sovereignty. Iran's foreign minister called the strike unlawful, urging UN condemnation and claiming it violates Iran's territorial integrity. Meanwhile, Israeli lawmakers expressed dissatisfaction with the perceived lack of a strong response, reflecting the tensions and the complexity within this ongoing geopolitical rivalry. To help us analyze the recent developments in the Middle East, we're joined by Nicholas Williams from London, a former NATO official. Welcome to our program and thank you for joining us, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
First, let's start off by talking about the recent retaliatory exchanges. How serious is the threat of direct confrontation between Israel and Iran, given the tit-for-tat situation that's happening?
Well, paradoxically enough, I think we've reached the peak of seriousness. And henceforth, it'll be, you will see a relaxation of the confrontation. You said that this has been perfectly calibrated. Well, who has been doing the calibration? It's the Americans, the Iranians, and the Israelis. Israelis under pressure from the Americans, who are intending this to be the final confrontation between and tit for tat between Israel and Iran in this round of confrontation.
So as you've said that the US has played a role when it comes to orchestrating how the retaliation would look like. But what kind of diplomatic negotiations could possibly be in play to de-escalate these hostilities in the next coming weeks? Because there is a possibility that, tensions could increase, even though that the response was relatively mild.
Yes, there is a chance, and these sorts of situations depend really on restraint by all parties and the perception of restraint. And the restraint between the Israelis and Iranians is a forced restraint, forced by the Americans. What sort of diplomatic representations? Well, I think it's all behind the scenes. I think the US have back channels to the Iranians, and they promised the Iranians that if they restrained Israel to the minimum that Israel felt that it was necessary to do, then the Iranians would reciprocate and hold back from retaliating in a massive form. So neither the Americans nor the Iranians want a regional war. And that is, I don't say it's a sign of hope, but it's a sign of hope for the near future.
Okay, well, since you've brought up the idea of, possibility of the US pressuring Israel, obviously there's an increase in civilian casualties in Gaza, and there are a lot of obstacles when it comes to, allowing humanitarian aid in. The Israelis are blockading the north of Gaza, and they've been doing this for almost 3 weeks now. Do you think that the US could play a role in pressuring the Israeli side to do this? Because it seems like the US has come out and said basically that we have no control over what the Israelis do, but then when it came to the retaliation towards Iran, they did have some measure of control.
Yes, I wouldn't say control, but some measure of persuasion and dissuasion. And unfortunately, you can see the US's priorities in this whole choreography between Iran and Israel. The US wants absolutely to prevent a regional war between Iran and Israel. So it uses its power to the maximum. But in Gaza, I believe, don't have any evidence for this, but I believe that the Israelis have been given a free hand because they've promised the Americans that they won't do anything in relation to Iran that the Americans would not like. So they've been given a relatively free hand in Gaza, subject to the Israelis' free hand in Gaza, subject to facilitating some humanitarian aid, but they're strictly under pressure in relation to Iran.
But I understand that this is like what the Americans are trying to say to the international media in general, that we're trying to get as much humanitarian aid in and pressuring the Israeli side to sort of allow humanitarian aid in. But in reality, hospitals in the north of Gaza have been rendered completely obsolete, and they're not working or functioning, and there's no aid at all entering into the north of Gaza. Do you think that the US could somehow take more action towards pressuring the Israelis to allow humanitarian aid?
They could, and I think the Biden administration wants to do that, and possibly in return for this restraint against Iran, then you will see in the next week or so some sort of easing off of the blockade in terms of humanitarian aid. But that's pure speculation. The US doesn't want to exert its full power in relation to Gaza, where it wanted to assert its full power in relation to Iran.
Sir, can we go back to the idea of, the US and the EU trying to de-escalate the situation generally in the Middle East and, trying to say that they're trying to reach a ceasefire? Do you think that this is something that could happen within the near future? Or is it something that, it's just a media statement since, the US has basically told the Israelis you have 30 days to settle everything in the north of Gaza, and then we'll see. 30 days is not really a way to get a ceasefire.
Well, the Biden administration wants absolutely to exercise its influence over Israel in relation to humanitarian aid, because the elections coming at the beginning of November are important, and neither Harris nor Biden want to be accused of going soft on humanitarian aid. And as I said, the Israelis owe the Americans something in terms of concession, and you will see possibly, and I hope, the humanitarian aid. In terms of Gaza, in terms of Gaza, the Israelis want absolutely to take their revenge on Hamas, and unfortunately, they're causing disproportionate humanitarian damage.
Which kind of brings me to the next idea here, sir. With recent regional destabilization, how might these conflicts affect the long-term geopolitical landscape for the Middle East in general?
Well, I think it's a significant moment and a pivotal moment. Not that you will see a rapid development in the Middle East in terms of realignments, but these events, I believe, will persuade the Arab countries, particularly Saudi Arabia, to hedge their bets in terms of China and in terms even of Iran. I think the absolute power and influence that the US has in this situation, which it has not exercised in relation to Gaza, means that the Arab countries, whatever political stance they have, will hedge their bets and try to make good relations with China, with Russia, and even with Iran.
Okay, thank you so much, sir. That was Nicholas Williams, a former NATO official, joining us from London. Thank you for your insights and thank you for joining us.
Grant, thank you very much.
The United States is just days away from a pivotal presidential election. On November 5th, 2024, Americans will decide who will lead the country for the next 4 years: the incumbent Vice President Kamala Harris or former President Donald Trump. As the race tightens, both candidates are making a final push in key battleground states. Polling in Michigan, for instance, indicates a neck-and-neck contest.
We will build what I call an opportunity economy.
We will make America great.
We're ready to fight for it. As one people, we are moving forward.
We will make America safe again.
With the election drawing nearer, The Guardian has published an article titled "Polling has turned the US elections into a game and we need to take a reality check." This article raises a critical point about the role of polling in modern politics. The piece urges, or rather argues, that the obsession with polling has turned elections into a spectacle of personalities rather than a serious discussion of policies. It highlights how constant poll updates, often contradictory and sensational, shape public perception more than they reflect reality. This fixation can overshadow substantive debates on key issues, reducing politics to a competitive sport rather than a platform for meaningful policy discourse. With just days to go until the election, it's worth questioning whether we are focusing on the right metrics. After all, will poll numbers truly impact the way Americans vote? To help us discuss the latest developments in the US elections, we're joined from Washington by Leif Larson, a Republican Party member. Thank you, sir, for joining us.
Thank you.
Sir, with the national polls showing a narrow lead between Harris at 51% to 47%, how significant do you think this slight recovery is for her, especially among Hispanic voters and the suburban women? Is it a sign that she is gaining momentum, or is this just, differences, slight differences in polling that may not come to reality?
Well, I think it's a slight difference in polling. I think at the end of the day, anybody watching the race knew that the popular vote would probably be won by the Harris campaign, with California leading the way for that. But I think what we need to do is, where can we focus down on any of these polling numbers on the key states such as Michigan and Pennsylvania, and get a read on where those states are going, because as everybody knows, at the end of the day, it's not the number of votes that you get, but it's the electoral votes that a campaign brings in for the presidential race that's going to decide who won and who doesn't.
Yes. Well, since you brought up Michigan, Michigan has historically, for a while now, been blue, but now it's sort of like a swing state, now, and it's up for grabs. So Trump rallies have increasingly attempted to appeal to the Arab Americans and Muslim voters in Michigan. Do you believe this approach can sway undecided voters and make some sort of significant difference in states like Michigan and North Carolina?
Well, they can. I believe they can. And both campaigns have been focusing on Michigan and Pennsylvania with larger Jewish and Arab American voters, and speaking to them on particular issues. And we can look at the Harris campaign. Their efforts there have been similar on some phases to the Trump campaign, which is supporting of the Israel. Both campaigns have made that position. But at the same time, the difference with the Harris campaign is they focused a lot more towards Arab Americans in supporting humanitarian aid and finding a solution to the ongoing issue that's a two-state solution.
So do you
difference
think,
there?
Yes, but I mean, do you think that
I was going to say the difference between.
Yes, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Go ahead.
It's just that, like, you were talking about, like, how the Arab Americans are swaying more towards Trump due to his ideas of humanitarian aid and the two-state solution. But do you think that also the Arab Americans or the Muslim community in the United States are slightly going towards Trump because of foreign policy when it comes to the Biden administration, not just talking points from both candidates?
Well, I think you need to look at where both candidates have been, and like I said, they both come down strictly in support of Israel. As I said, the difference would be between the Trump and the Harris campaign is the Harris are more in support of finding a two-state solution, while what the Trump campaign has been pointing to is their success in their previous administration with things such as the Abrams Accords and bringing more of a diplomatic Arab nation solution to finding a solution to the ongoing war in Gaza. I think when we look at Michigan and Pennsylvania and a few of the other swing states where we have an impact on the Jewish and Arab communities, the Middle East tensions create a nuanced battlefield there in those swing states, where in the past you might have had just both campaigns saying, we're strictly behind Israel. Now they both have to find that nuanced approach that speaks to more of a micro voting group, such as the Arab Americans, instead of something more general in approach, such as we're a staunch ally of Israel.
Issues. Sir, when it comes to the economic issues, now let's talk about inside the United States. They remain a priority for 45% of the voters, with Trump leading Harris in this area. Does this economic edge give Trump the upper hand, especially in states where manufacturing and job growth are a key concern?
I believe it does. And I think it plays a little bit better hand in hand with the other issues that favor a Trump campaign, which are immigration. I think both those issues are strongly backing the Trump campaign and his election, and I think those are the top issues. I think for most Americans, when you were talking about immigration, Trump has a double-digit lead when it comes to that issue, and on the economy, I think he's also maintained a lead there with his strong support for American jobs and American manufacturing, and making sure that foreign materials and manufacturing do not get a favorable position over Americans.
Okay, so in many recent surveys, there are suggestions that voters expect Trump to win despite the tight race. How do you think this perception impacts the dynamics of the campaign, and could it influence voters' turnout in Trump's favor or against it? I mean, if people feel like Trump's secure, they may not go out to vote.
Well, I think we've seen, over the last 8 years now, that the strong supporters for former President Trump, the MAGA supporters, aren't swayed by that. They will show up. They will turn out to vote. In fact, I think they've been driven to such a point where they're showing up to vote that they're actually showing up to vote early in the pre-election, absentee ballots and early voting, which for years they had said was the reason that former President Trump lost the 2020 elections. But now we're seeing them returning to that in an enthusiastic aspect of making sure that they do get out to vote either before or on election day. And we're seeing a lot more of them turn out to vote in pre-election voting, early election.
Yeah, okay. Well, what about the idea that, there's 9 days left and there's campaigning, obviously, that's going to happen within the 9 days. But what do you think Trump's most effective strategy should be to clench the crucial states and win the elections?
Well, I think, appearing in some more of the swing states would be key. Of course, I'm not privy to what the campaign has planned. They have a big rally in Madison Square Garden that's going to be coming up. And I think it'll be geared towards speaking to those people in those swing states. But I think, primarily, I would probably advise to keep up the appearances, keep talking about immigration, keep talking about strengthening the American economy and showing that the Harris campaign and the Biden administration have not done that for Americans and have left middle Americans and lower income Americans in a spot that is untenable for them in the future, and that he won't do that. And quite frankly, avoid any misspoken words. And that can sometimes be a problem with the Trump campaign, as they have always said, you have to let Trump be Trump. But in these last weeks, last 10 days, I would probably keep him a little bit longer under wraps and just let him do this big rally and some last minute tours of the swing states.
If we could talk, I mean, you spoke about internal issues, including the economy and, healthcare or whatever it is that, Trump is addressing the American citizen. But do you think that foreign policy also somehow plays a role in, either, persuading the voter to, vote Trump for when it comes to issues like Ukraine, Gaza, or the international issues in general?
Well, I think when we're talking about the people that support Trump, we're now talking about not a particular issue when it comes to foreign affairs. I think we're talking about which can be, kind of distilled down to America first. And I think when they look at these type of things, of course, they're strong supporters of sending military aid to Israel against the Iranian-backed groups there. They are less enthusiastic, and in fact, probably on the other side of that, of sending foreign aid to Ukraine, and because they can see that as possibly evolving into more of a NATO issue, which then would require, kind of boots on the ground from the United States. And they want to avoid that. They want to avoid most MAGA supporters on the America First, look after ourselves first, and then, and stay out of any foreign entanglements. Yeah. So I believe that when overall the foreign issues that issues that are discussed are covered by that MAGA level.
Yeah, basically focusing on America. Thank you. Unfortunately, we're out of time, sir. So thank you for your insights, and thank you for joining us, Mr. Leif Larsen, a member of the Republican Party. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode. As the elections and both campaigns will continue their efforts to secure their votes, stay with us as we bring you the latest updates when it comes to the U.S. elections. That wraps up our episode today for In Focus. Remember to stay updated by following Q News on YouTube, Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok at Q News EG for the latest developments.